I haven't talked about SpongeBob in a while, and before I rank season 17, I wanted to watch some old episodes and rank every special episode of SpongeBob. I had some trouble picking which was actually a special, but I overall just decided on all the double length or longer episodes, and also Shanghaied, as that seems to be the most common list. Whatever I ranked Truth or Square in my season 6 ranking was too low, because this episode genuinely sucks. It's way too long with an hour runtime, but it feels like less is accomplished than in a standard SpongeBob 11-minute episode. The patchy sections are insanely annoying, with random actor cameos that take up so much time instead of actually making good comedy and moving the plot forward. But the actual main plot of the main characters being in the air vents and just flashing back to random stuff is also very boring and annoying. This has the same comedy style of season 6, where it feels very awkward and makes you uncomfortable, and it doesn't help that the whole episode feels very claustrophobic as well. This episode was an absolute chore to get through, and the fact they chose this to be the 10th anniversary episode is insane, when it is this distant to what SpongeBob actually is as a show. The Clash of Triton is another season 6 episode, so yeah, one of the worst seasons in the show also has some of the worst special episodes. At least Truth or Square, even if it is maybe the worst episode period in the entire show, has a purpose of celebrating SpongeBob. But Clash of Triton and a lot of special episodes just feel so useless, and I don't know why they were even made. Every part of this is just boring and uninteresting. Neptune is turned into a crybaby loser in this episode, and way too much of this is just talking about Triton. So when he is finally introduced as a soulless, annoying teenager, it's pretty frustrating, because he is the entire focus of the episode. He's literally in the title. And obviously this has the standard season 6 feeling, which makes it even worse. Yeah, this episode is just garbage in every way. The only reason a SquarePants family vacation isn't at the bottom is because it had some cool visuals with the Great Barrier Reef stuff, but literally everything else in this episode is hot garbage. It didn't make me laugh one time, and it just felt like it was trying to kill time the entire episode. Patrick and SpongeBob are the only two characters for most of the runtime, and this is the least funny they have ever been. SpongeBob's parents are here for a bit as well, and they don't contribute anything good either. This is most famous for the road song stuff, which is so obnoxious that it's pretty impressive. If I had to sum up this episode in a word, I would just say obnoxious, and it sucks. I think every special after the bottom 3 has some positive aspects, starting with Atlantis SquarePantis, which has some really cool visuals during the song portions, and I actually think the lore stuff with Atlantis is pretty cool. David Bowie as a voice actor is also sick, even though he should have sang since that is the majority of the episode. Yeah, there are way too many songs in this one, and pretty much all of them are bad. All the characters just get written down to one singular thing they like the entire episode, and it's so stupid. And pretty obvious complaint, this episode is way too long. It's 45 minutes of unfunny jokes, and the characters being super annoying and poorly written. This episode actually had some potential, so it makes it even more frustrating with how bad it turned out. SpongeBob's Last Stand is another Dark Age SpongeBob special, and I hate that this era chose to make the most specials, because they pretty much all suck. Look, I get what this was trying to do with the environment stuff, but the whole episode is just so boring and has so much filler just for the sake of making it special length. The songs were super annoying, and this might be the worst Bob Dylan reference of all time, and the execution of the environment and highway stuff ended up just being, once again, obnoxious. And it just shifted to being more about the Krusty Krab than Jellyfish Fields, which is disappointing. SpongeBob You're Fired is a pretty notorious SpongeBob special, and that's because it's just really bad and not enjoyable at all. It's a pretty depressing episode of SpongeBob, where the majority of the runtime is just him being miserable and sad since he lost his job. And every time I watch this, I just get frustrated, because I know SpongeBob had more in his life than just his job. So this episode making SpongeBob such a one-dimensional character is pretty frustrating. Also, I don't think the message really has to be there for a good episode, but the message here is so bad. The only thing that makes SpongeBob feel happy again is getting his same old job at the Krusty Krab back, which just makes this whole episode feel pointless, and like a missed opportunity for SpongeBob to come to terms with a life without the Krusty Krab. The Great Patty Caper actually has a pretty interesting premise with SpongeBob and Patrick going on a train, which creates a unique setting we don't ever see in SpongeBob. But other than the aesthetics here, this episode just sucks. People dog on seasons 6 through 8 all the time, and it's because they just suck. And this episode is a perfect example of that. It's not funny at all, the main characters feel like shells of themselves, and the filler and padding to extend the length is just unbearable. The ending with Mr. Krabs and Plankton also just makes this feel so unnecessary and stupid. The substance of this episode is non-existent, and this is another special that I don't even know why they made. Escape from Beneath Glove World is the first time we have a really modern special here, which are surprisingly usually pretty decent. But this episode is just really annoying. The plot and premise of the robots and some hidden Glove World stuff is pretty unique, but the usual season 12 comedy does not work, and this made me remember why it might be my least favorite season in the whole show. The animatronic and toddler stuff was mildly interesting for the first time, and then they focused on it way too much for the second half of the episode, to the point where I kinda zoned out. This is maybe the most forgettable special in the entire show, and it's probably the least special episode of them all. Ghoul Fools was one that I watched a lot when I was really young, and one that used to be one of my favorite episodes. But when I rewatched it for the first time in years for my Season 8 ranking, I realized just how unfunny and boring it is. This episode actually starts decently interesting with some cool ghost designs and a pretty spooky looking ship, but as soon as the aesthetics are thrown out the window, we get a really unfunny special with no substance and typical obnoxious Season 8 humor. The most common and apparent problem in these specials is the super obnoxious filler, and it is genuinely a problem in every single special from this era, even the ones that are higher on the list. I don't know why they needed to make every mildly unique episode a special, but it ended up ruining some interesting premises by executing them all in the worst way possible. It Came from Goo Lagoon is another very forgettable and pointless feeling special. Like, why did they feel the need to make this a double-length episode? The plot is pretty standard, where some random problem comes out of nowhere, Plankton uses it to get the formula, and then he fails at it. There's nothing special about this episode, and it results in this just feeling like a total bore with no stakes that make it interesting. Patrick is also way too annoying in this one, and it sucks that one of the only specials with Sandy as the main character is at maximum stupidity, because it should be the total opposite, but there is nothing clever or memorable about this special. Sandy's Country Christmas is another Sandy special, and I think it's the first one on the list I would say isn't really bad, it's just mediocre. This is pretty easily the worst stop-motion special, which are some of the coolest ones in the show. And honestly, I think if this wasn't stop-motion, it might be a bit lower, because the plot of this episode feels pretty insignificant. It's cool to see Sandy's family, but a lot of them are really annoying, and them being the focal point of the episode is a decision I understand, but just don't really enjoy. This is also the worst Christmas special, and I think that's largely because it doesn't feel very holiday-like. This episode doesn't really make you feel anything, to be honest, and the visuals kinda carry it on its back. The Sponge Who Could Fly or The Lost episode is honestly carried by the patchy sections. This is the first classic SpongeBob episode to be on the list, and it's by far the worst, and the rest of them will be much higher. I don't think that is much of a hot take, because the majority of this episode is pretty universally disliked. The SpongeBob learning how to fly stuff, and then getting hated on by Bikini Bottom is not very enjoyable, and I think the stuff where he gets used by the citizens might be even worse. It's just not funny, and I kind of feel bad for SpongeBob. But the patchy Lost episode stuff is honestly pretty classic, especially the cheap walk cycles and the crash out that he has. As soon as that stuff ends, it falls off majorly. Goodbye Krabby Patty has two sides, and one I think is really bad, and one I think is decent. The actual heart of the episode with Mr. Krabs turning the Krusty Krab into a museum and a factory is not funny at all, and the new characters introduced are all annoying, and it just makes me feel bad for SpongeBob again. But the stuff with SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, I actually think is done really well, and it's rare we see newer episodes about their friendship. It's fun to be reminded that they are best friends at the end of the day, and they suffer without each other. But too much of this episode is focused on the annoying frozen Krabby Patty stuff that I think is really uninteresting. SpongeBob and Patrick's timeline twist-up is actually one of the two specials that I have yet to talk about in my season rankings, as I haven't gotten to season 16 yet. Don't worry, I have watched it, and the video should come out somewhat soon. But anyway, this special is a very long one with a 44-minute runtime, and there are some interesting parts here, but the episode as a whole feels pretty gimmicky. The whole thing is just SpongeBob classic moments being revisited, and it's pretty cool to see it, but there's pretty much zero substance in this episode. And the thought of watching it for a second time does not feel too fun for me. The original stuff isn't horrible, and honestly the whole season is not bad, but I wish this episode did more with the premise that it ended up doing. Hello Bikini Bottom is another Season 8 one I used to love when I was a kid, and I think it's one of the better specials from this era, but it has a lot of flaws. The song scenes are not fun, as I just don't really like the more song-based episodes in general, but the actual comedy in this episode is not bad. Seeing Mr. Krabs just completely ruin everything and their stupid music tour go horrible is pretty entertaining, especially whenever they perform at somewhere increasingly more pathetic than the last, and the random tour guy that just spawns in occasionally is pretty funny, but too much of this is focused on annoying song segments for me to rank this any higher. Snow Yellow and the Seven Jellies was pretty fun to watch for the first time, as I enjoyed seeing the characters in different fantasy forms, kinda like Dunces and Dragons. But watching this again, it definitely has a lot less substance than Dunces and Dragons. The plot of Snow White is definitely classic, but this episode doesn't really do anything that new with it, and kinda just subs in underwater and SpongeBob variants for the classic story. Most of these newer episodes do this, where they take these classic tales and substitute SpongeBob characters in, and they are some of the better modern episodes, but compared to older classics, and even some other newer ones, it doesn't really compare. Creepaway Camp is a pretty fun Halloween special that has some classic horror feel to it. There's just a few problems I have here that hold it back. One is that I don't know who like half of these characters are. I never watched Camp Coral, obviously, so all the new characters were just randoms to me, and I didn't know anything that they were talking about. That's just a complaint in general. I don't know anything about Camp Coral, and they didn't bother explaining because they want you to watch the show. But I'm not doing that. I also don't think this episode is that funny, as the season it came from, being season 14, is just one of the least funny in the show. I enjoy the horror stuff, especially near the end where it's just the main few characters, but I have too many problems for this to be higher. Whatever Happened to SpongeBob I think is probably the most overhated special in the show. People lump this with the bottom few, which I think is just insane. I definitely don't love this episode, but I think it has some cool stuff. The introduction of New Kelp City I think is pretty cool, and the idea of SpongeBob having amnesia allows for some funny moments, especially when he just is fully convinced he was a total loser beforehand. The bubble popping gang is definitely the highlight though. It's just so stupid that it makes me laugh. I get some of the complaints, like the idiot boy stuff being mean or whatever, but that happens a lot in some of the most beloved episodes in the entire show, so I don't get why this one catches a lot of flack for it. My main complaint would be that, other than the bubble stuff, it's not really that funny, but I don't despise this one like most people do. Goons on the Moon is a pretty enjoyable special for me, but I don't think it feels like a Christmas special, even though that's what it was intended to be. Santa shows up, I guess, and there are some Christmas themes, but this episode works a lot better as just a space adventure episode with some really funny Squidward stuff. Yeah, the Squidward stuff carries the episode to me. The Dark Side of the Moon scenes are really creative, and seeing Squidward lose his mind is the funniest part. The rest of this, with Sandy's crew, has some funny moments, but a lot of it, once they actually get to the moon, can drag for a bit, and I was just waiting to get back to the Squidward segments. This episode isn't bad at all, and is actually pretty enjoyable, but I don't think the main themes that the episode was going for were executed all that well. SpongeBob's Road to Christmas is another decently enjoyable Christmas special. Christmas is the most common holiday for these specials, and I think it usually is done pretty well. This is the newest one, and I think the premise makes it so this is hard to mess up. SpongeBob, Plankton, and Patrick go to Encino, which they think is the North Pole, which makes for some funny amusement park scenes, but then it gets better when they go to the actual North Pole. I like the different forms of the reindeer and elves, and overall the creativity and visuals make it so this is definitely not a boring episode. I still don't think this is the funniest special, and is carried a lot by the style and visuals, but compared to most specials, this definitely has more positive elements. Frozen Face Off is yet another winter episode. It's not a Christmas one, but the amount of snow-based special episodes there are is pretty insane. This is one of the cooler ones though. The idea of a snow race based off of real husky races is really unique, and I love the snowy atmosphere. The snow monster stuff is definitely the highlight for me. It creates real stakes, and the art style is so stupid, but also kinda sick. This one could have been a lot better though. The race didn't last as long as I would have hoped, and the plankton scenes, while kinda funny, definitely frustrated me because I kind of wish he didn't have anything to do with this episode. But this is still a Dark Age SpongeBob special, so I have to give it credit for being way better than almost all the others. Pigkin Pearl is the most recent special episode, and honestly the first one on this list I can say is good. The last few have had some good parts, but still fall short and are not ones I would willingly rewatch, but Pigkin Pearl is. This episode has some pretty solid humor throughout, with the Patrick announcing stuff being my personal favorite. I also just love the idea of Pearl having a dedicated special, as it allows for her to shine with the spotlight, and I think she does. This kind of reminds me of Waterboy, with a non-football player who's just a natural monster on the field, and then carries their team, but this episode is a lot better than that movie, even if it's not the most original of episodes. My biggest complaint is that this doesn't really feel like a special a lot of the time, but I still enjoyed pretty much the whole thing. SpongeBob SquarePants vs. The Big One is my personal favorite special from seasons 6 through 8, barely beating out Frozen Face Off. This is definitely a hot take, but this has always been one I've enjoyed. I love how all of the main characters are separated, and all three of the locations they go to make for some entertaining jokes and conflicts. But the SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward stuff is definitely the best. JKL is such a ridiculous character that it actually works. The training scenes where he just does the dumbest stuff is so funny to me. Honestly, this whole episode feels like one big parody of surfing movies and just the culture as a whole. And I think it's done really tastefully and has some very funny scenes. SpongeBob's House Party, or Party Pooper Pants, actually grew on me a lot on my most recent rewatch. I remember this being an unfunny classic episode, but it honestly has all the charm of Season 3. The beginning stuff has some all-time jokes, and watching SpongeBob get really cocky and boss everyone around is super enjoyable, and I think it is in character for him. And then the episode shifts when he gets shut out of his house and just has the worst day imaginable, while everyone else is having the time of their lives without him. Him freaking out over thinking it's a mess is so stupid, but I love it. The patchy scenes are also really funny, which they honestly all are in these specials. This has all the charm of classic SpongeBob and an interesting plot. Moving into the top 10, we have Ugh, or SpongeBob B.C, which I actually used to dislike, but it honestly grew on me a lot. Even though all the SpongeBob stuff has no comprehensible dialogue, it's really easy to understand what's going on, which I think is really impressive. Watching the three main characters act like total idiots and discover fire is so funny. The idea that such a major event in human history started from these three is hilarious, and the whole fire segment is a really funny part of the episode. The patchy stuff, especially the end with the ridiculous song, is also really funny, and honestly a lot better than I remember it being. This is a really unique SpongeBob special, and maybe the most daring and experimental of them all. But to be expected, this era of SpongeBob was so amazing that they nailed it, and the execution was great. Pest of the West is one of my favorite genres of specials where the main characters are placed in a totally different environment from usual, and it is a lot of fun. It has a standard spaghetti western plot, and I am a huge fan of westerns, so this was an episode made for me. I also enjoy all the characters here, especially Deadeye Plankton. I think this might be my favorite Plankton villain role out of any special, as he's actually intimidating to the characters. SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship is also really funny, and the Idiot Friend song at the end is surprisingly also pretty funny. This is a blast of a special for the entire runtime, and I think it's one of the most underrated in the entire series. The Legend of Bikini Bottom is another stop-motion episode, and this one is probably the best-looking episode in the entire show, to be honest. The entire thing is just a visual treat, and I honestly think the plot does come second to the visuals, but that's okay when they look this incredible. The second half, where the Flying Dutchman comes in and tries to scare SpongeBob, is one of my favorite scenes out of any special, and one that I could rewatch as many times as I want without getting bored. I do think the pretty lackluster and unoriginal plot holds it back from being an all-time classic special, but I still get so much enjoyment out of this every time I watch. Friend or Foe has a really cool premise and one that changes the entire dynamic of the show. Mr. Krabs and Plankton are mortal enemies, and their rivalry has been the focal point for, I'd say, a very large portion of SpongeBob episodes, but this one reveals that they were once best friends. It's such a simple plot twist, but it works so well, and I think makes their relationship better for the rest of the series. I think the idea of every character having different stories is really cool, because their personalities so obviously reflect in their stories, and we get to finally see why they hate each other so much. The comedy isn't always top-notch here, but this is definitely one of the more story and character-focused special episodes, so I can't look past that. The patchy segments are also pretty good here, and this whole episode is great. SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout is another 44-minute episode, and I think it's pretty easily the best of the bunch. This is everything Truth or Square should have been. It is the 20th anniversary of the show, and it really feels like a celebration of SpongeBob. The highlight is obviously the trusty slab sequence, where we see the live-action actors portray their surface versions of the main characters, but every live-action scene is great, and a blast to watch. The creativity and absurdity of the real-life scenes is so much fun, but it also doesn't go too crazy, like other episodes from this era. This is so easily the best episode of Season 12, that it feels like the rest of the season was overlooked, and they just wanted to make this one. The Bikini Bottom stuff is also really good, and this whole episode is just the writers making a love letter to SpongeBob, and it's great. It's a SpongeBob Christmas is the second best Christmas episode and my favorite live action episode, and now that I think about it, it's actually my favorite special from season 6 through 8, not SpongeBob SquarePants versus the big one. I kind of forgot this one was from those seasons because it's so good. I don't think it looks as good as Bikini Bottom, but the plot is a lot better. This honestly might be the episode I've seen the most. I watch it every Christmas, and when it aired, I watched it all the time as well. It's just an episode that is overall very special to me personally, but I still think it holds its own and is a great special. This feels like Christmas. It gets you in a jolly mood and focuses on important themes that make up any good Christmas-focused piece of media. The Jerktonian plotline is super good and executes it really well. It allows for the positivity and optimism that has made SpongeBob such a legendary show to shine through, and it perfectly creates a Christmas spirit the episode was going for. Top 5 special for me. Dunces and Dragons is an episode that focuses a lot on aesthetics, but unlike other special episodes, it also has a memorable plot that fits that aesthetic, and it makes it an overall very good special. The medieval setting is one that I love in any form of media, but it is done surprisingly well in this show. It's such a unique feeling episode, and I often have the urge to rewatch it, as very few episodes give me the same feeling. Other than the vibe and atmosphere, which is a rare thing I can say about a SpongeBob episode, the comedy is really good. This is the best alternate character type of premise in the show for me. They all fit perfectly, and the fact that SpongeBob and Patrick are their normal selves makes it a lot funnier. This is a classic special for me, but I think the top 3 are on another level. Look, my top 3 is very predictable, but I honestly couldn't see this list any differently. Have You Seen the Snail comes in at number 3, and this is an all-time classic without a doubt. It's one of the most legendary episodes, with easily the most famous song from the show. The scene the song plays over, I think, is better than the song itself, as it's the emotional core of this special. The premise of SpongeBob losing Gary and getting depressed is a very sad idea, and the show does not hold back on making you feel for SpongeBob, which I think is really great and allows for the emotions to really hit home. Seeing them reunite at the end is genuinely satisfying and makes me smile every time. And every other time SpongeBob and Gary interact, I think of this episode and how tight of a bond they have. It's also really funny, which is impressive because this is a rare time where the comedy isn't the most important part of the episode. Both SpongeBob and Gary's point of views here are done really well, and it all comes together to make one of the best episodes in all of SpongeBob. Shanghaied is one of the earliest special episodes, and it is still one of the best. This is the funniest of all of these. It's non-stop, incredible gags, and honestly might be one of the funniest episodes in all of SpongeBob. There are so many legendary jokes here, with the perfume department, the Squidward fly of despair, the yodeling, I mean, the list just goes on. It's the shortest one here, but it counts as a special because of the whole wish thing where the audience could vote. But even with its length, it definitely feels special, with higher stakes and focusing on the Flying Dutchman, who at this point was never the focal point of anything really. This episode is 100% carried by the incredibly written jokes and the creativity and originality of it. There's not a lot of heart or anything like that compared to other more emotional specials, but that's okay. This one doesn't try to send a message. It tries to be really charming and hilarious, and it succeeds. This is an all-time classic SpongeBob episode with some of the best written comedy in the entire series. Season 2 ends up having the top 2 specials in the entire show. There was no question for me what the best SpongeBob special episode was. It is Christmas Who. This was actually the first special episode, and I think it set the gold standard for any cartoon special. The holiday vibes are at a peak with this one, with some really great music. But even if those things are true, that's not what makes this episode so special. The main plot of this is Squidward growing as a person and making up for his past cruel actions. This early in the show, we see a lot of stuff like this, and it's one of the reasons modern SpongeBob is so amazing. But the end of this episode might be the best example of character writing in this show, and it's one of my all-time favorite scenes. Even without the great Squidward stuff in the second half, this whole episode is filled with heart and really good jokes. The premise of all the characters learning about Christmas allows for their interpretations to all be different, and it is really fun to see how the main cast react to the holiday and how it all comes together when the holiday comes. Christmas Who has everything you would want in a SpongeBob special. It's well written, hilarious, perfectly paced, has great songs, and has more heart than any other special in the show.